Hi, I'm Burr Clevenger, and I'm here with John Murphy for another edition of Digital Dilemmas. And thank you for joining us. This week, it is just us. We have no guest, but we are talking about the upcoming election, or the election that is, yeah, upcoming. This'll come out on Monday, and the election is Tuesday. And John has been doing some really interesting work using technology and AI to, well, why don't you tell us?
Digital Dilemmas is a Link Media original podcast. Yeah, thanks. So I know a lot of us, when it comes to big elections like this, there's a lot of uh, news stories regarding polls. Who's winning? Who's losing? What demographic group is going for what candidate? And that's been going on for decades. So what we do at UConn in the social media lab that I have with 7 students this semester, whenever there's a big election, we actually work under the theory that polls, as they've historically been done, are outdated. They're really not that accurate. And at the very least, should be, if we want accuracy, we should be looking at some of the social media data. And by that, I mean, we're looking at conversations that people are having online on all platforms, websites, news outlets, social media channels. And we're collecting those conversations and slicing and dicing them to analyze how people really feel.
I just want to cut in here because I want to be really clear. I think when you say social media, I don't want people to be misled because it's not just limited to the social media platforms. It's comments that people are making on news articles and conversations people are having in blogs. Is that correct?
That's 100% correct. It's any conversation any
It's
human is having, or
it's
bot,
really
but that's another story.
all digital conversations
Correct.
around certain topics.
Correct. And in this particular case, we're looking at 2 candidates and the various topics.
One thing I also wanted to bring up at the beginning is how you're doing this research, because I know that you ran into um, some issues early on because of the way that you were searching, because you started out searching by the candidate's name and you had to rejigger that. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, so to answer that question, if you're looking for the word Trump, you're going to get 7 million hits per hour around the world, and it's a lot of noise. So that really wasn't collecting quality data. So what we've done is we've changed how we've searched regarding the candidates to not just include their name, but also include their titles, their synonyms, and then depending on what we're looking for, whether it's how do you feel about a candidate regarding a certain topic, etc., we then use AI to, we ask AI, for example, tell us all the phrases that humans use online when they talk about abortion. And it will give us the top 10 words and the top X amount of hashtags. And what we do is we look for those phrases and or words and or hashtags combined with the titles of the candidates so that we zero in on just those topics. So we're doing quite a bit of work in order to get accurate information and weed out the noise. And I don't want to go down a rat hole and be too nerdy, but it's quite
I
complicated.
think that ship has sailed.
Yeah. Oh,
No, I'm
sorry.
joking. I kid. I kid.
Okay. So the hard part that we spent 2 months doing before we actually got good data the last couple of weeks was what you just asked. How can we effectively look at conversations that people are having in the United States and get quality data that reflects how people feel? That took us 2 months to figure out how to get quality data. That's how challenging this was.
Well, it's so interesting. And I do think um I have to imagine that polls, the traditional polling methods are outdated. Um,
I think they are. I think they're trying to do better because they have not done well in the last 10 or 12 years. But I still feel they're a little bit outdated. And if you
well, I don't
want
think
to,
they've changed much. I don't think the methodology has changed much, and the world has changed so much. It's like,
well, first of
that.
all, I think the first thing that people should know if they're listening to this podcast is, well, what do you mean? Well, when we see a poll on any network, the first question we should ask is, well, who are you asking in these polls? And typically, uh, up until recently, they were using landlines. Well, first of
Well,
all, no
that's
one's
exactly what I mean. The only person I know who still has a landline is your Aunt Joyce, who's 95 and still living on her own. God bless. She's a lovely lady. But I
right.
mean, she's literally the only person I know who still has a landline.
So that's a challenge for them as a survey taker. Then who do they call? Let's say they do call your cell phone. Well, how do they get your name? They get your name from the rolls of people who voted last time. That's one way they get names. So you would have had to have voted in the last election to even be included in being called. There's another layer of okay. So what about somebody who's 18, 19, 20, 21, 22 who never voted before? They're not getting called. So that's a whole demographic group being not included, for lack of a better phrase. Or what if, because of this particular election, which is so emotional, what if you are voting for the first time in many years because, quote unquote, you've had enough? So you
For
haven't
whatever
voted
reason.
before. You're not getting called, so you're not being asked any questions for these polls. So there's a lot of
I just
what I
think the whole
think
thing is very sus
there's a lot
because,
of gaps. There's a lot of gaps, and I'll add one more thing to it. I tend to think, and I think it'll be part of this conversation today. It'll come up somewhere that any election, but in particular this election, we'll use this as an example. If you are a news outlet, they treat it like it's a sporting event. It's entertainment, not news. So why is it that every poll that comes out that we've seen the last several months ends up with this kind of story? It's 50-50 and we're heading down to the wire. It's like it's a basketball game or a football game or we're going extra innings in baseball. It's not 50-50. Um,
well,
but
having
I
worked
think
in,
I'm just gonna I'll wrap it up. And you worked in media. Um, they love the fact that it's close. I'm not saying it's not close, but they love the fact that it's close and that they can get clicks or eyeballs on their newscast by turning it into a sporting event. And I think that's a disservice to the citizens and the citizenry. It's not a sporting event. This is a very serious election with very serious issues. And wouldn't it be nice if they just reported the news? But the polling is also part of their entertainment.
yes, to be clear, I want to be clear. I don't think that the networks, and I don't include Fox in this, but I don't think the networks are, cherry picking poll data or faking poll data or anything like that. I just think there's no, to your point, there's not much of an incentive to dig deeper when, a dead heat is more interesting to talk
Yeah,
about
that's
than a
probably a better
blowout.
way. It's probably a better way of saying it. You're communicating it clearer than I am. I think when they'll dig deeper and when you'll see the Steve Karnakis, that guy on that NBC
Well, I
uses.
think I was going to bring him up because I think it's really funny. He now does, he's on the horse races that we watch. John
He
and I
does
are
where
very
he even
into.
he does the Super Bowl. He does
He
the
does the
football
Super
playoffs.
Bowl, he does
Right.
the
He does
Kentucky
everything.
Derby, he does the all the Triple Crown races. He
Right.
has turned into, I, for lack
This
of a
is
better word, like it's almost like a circus sideshow what he does. It's
it's very entertaining. He's very good at what he does. He does what we do, just using different data sources. He analyzes in detail. So you'll see him. I'm betting, that's a funny phrase. I'm betting we start to see him yesterday or today or tonight or tomorrow because now the networks will start diving deeper into what really is going on or what they're seeing. And the Steve Karnakis of the world will actually, people will pay attention to them now. But up until now, you usually don't see it. It's more entertainment. So anyway, long story short, what we do at the University of Connecticut is we're looking at the conversations that you and I and Nick and all of our friends and are having online, and we're trying to figure out through using our own proprietary methodology, how do people feel about these two candidates, and what issues matter to people in the United States, and who's going to show up to vote and who's not. We're trying to figure that out based on social and digital, like you said, all digital conversations. That's what we're trying to do, and we think it's valuable. Um, anyway, that's
What
what we're doing.
have you seen I know all the traditional polling has everything at a dead heat, and the news, the mainstream media has decided what they think the issues are. What have you seen to be the issues, the main issues that people are talking about this election?
Great question. So I've got some of the data that we took up until yesterday, and for those who are listening, I'll be updating the data on Sunday, and that's when we'll stop collecting. But for the last month, the issues that matter the most, that are getting the most energy, are abortion and all the issues around female
Women's
women,
reproductive health.
women's reproductive health. Thank you. That is number one by a lot. Um, the second issue is immigration. That's getting a lot of play out there as well. And the economy and democracy. So if you had to pick four issues that people are voting on the most in all of the conversations we look at, it's female reproductive issues, immigration, the economy, and democracy. Those are the four out of the 10 that we looked at that people care about the most when it comes to issues.
Right. So those are the issues that are creating perhaps single issue voters, or I forget, there's nomenclature to describe them. People who decide for whom they are going to vote on a single issue.
Correct. And I think what we're seeing is a lot of energy, which means in our world, a lot of engagement and sharing of content around those four issues where people, you can actually tell when we look at the real conversations, people are, this might be the first time I can remember. I know it, I've been around, I've been following elections since 68 when I was a little kid. I was always a political buff, even as a little kid. I would say outside of the Vietnam War, and I don't have data on that because I was only 9, but people are really voting, I think, in this particular case on single issue. I'm seeing conversations that say something like this. I'm a Republican woman who lives in Florida. I've never voted for a Democrat, but I've organized a group here in such and such Florida, and we are all voting for Harris because of the female reproductive issues.
I'm also seeing, and I'm in touch with a lot of people who are doing door-to-door canvassing work, whether it's get out the vote movements or canvassing for political candidates. And I'm hearing from them, part of their, as part of some other digital conversations. I have voted Democrat in the past, but the immigrants are coming for our jobs, and this time I'm voting for Trump.
Correct.
Just as a
Correct. We're seeing that too. And so so there's a couple things that jump out at me in the data. I'm gonna walk through. Um, I don't want to be too nerdy, so I'll just explain if it needs explaining. We're capturing about 7 categories, 6 categories, 7 categories that we think matter. And I'm going to tell you, this shows that I think our data and our science is pretty good because it's pretty even. So I'll just at a high level, just let me walk it through with you. How do people feel likability about a candidate? Both had the exact same score, which means, wow, people are pretty set in stone on how they feel about one or the other. How many people feel they're angry at the other candidate? About the same. Engaging in all the content, which means any content you see about a particular candidate, who engages more, which kind of tells us who you like in general. Harris a little bit more, but really close. When it comes to issues, only a 10-point differential. I shouldn't say only, I take that back. That's the one category where we're seeing a
That's
difference.
statistically significant.
Yeah, I was going to say, I apologize. That's the one thing that separates the candidates is the issues we just spoke about.
Right.
Uh, everything else we look at is pretty close, like statistically insignificant. So again, that tells me people feel one way or the other about each candidate, but they're going to vote most likely on one issue or a feeling they have about a candidate because of something going on in society. And I'll get to that as we get through this podcast because I'm seeing some surprises that jump up at me.
That was my next question is what are, so far it seems like if everything, if a lot of what you're seeing is close, that sort of mirrors what the polls are saying, what
It
the
does.
traditional polls are
I want
saying.
it to be different than the polls, but I'm not. It's really close.
But what are you seeing? You are seeing some stuff that is surprising that
Yeah.
I
So
think is worth talking about.
there's a few things that I think we should pay attention to on election night that I'll be watching for, not only on Sunday when I collect my last piece of data with the students, but and then I'm going to watch again on Tuesday night and Wednesday as the final results come in. And that is, I'll walk through the things that I think are going to decide this election. So the swing states, obviously, this is all going to come down to the swing states. There's a surprise. Here's my first surprise. Keep an eye on the state of Florida.
That
I
is
am,
interesting because
I
people
am
have written Florida off
exactly.
as going red.
The data is through the roof right now in conversations for uh, Harris around female reproductive rights. I'm telling you, it's large. It's not insignificant. So that jumped out at me that the data for Florida is pointing toward Harris right now, and I did not expect to see that. Uh, so I'm going to find out Sunday if it holds true over the next few days. But boy, it looks to me as if the organization on the ground is having an impact when um, the women in Florida are organizing. And this includes a lot of Republican women. So that's something I'm looking at. That's jumping out at me. Um, what else is jumping out at me? It looks as if Trump's going to win Arizona, which would flip the state from last time. So I don't expect Harris to win Arizona. And I think so. And guess what? If you look beneath the data, Florida maybe gets flipped because of abortion. Arizona maybe gets flipped because of
Because of
immigration.
immigration.
See what I mean? And this is
Yeah.
really interesting as we watch the results. Um, these are social and digital conversations, and when we're consistent with everything that the experts say, that's a good sign to me that the data is high quality. So that when I see something unique, I have to go along with it and say it's something I got to watch. Um, so here's the other thing that I'm seeing that is really unique, and I know you and I have talked about it in the last few days. Um, I am seeing a breakdown in this election that is how do I'm not a reporter, so I'm not going to be politically correct or say it right. I am seeing a lot of males 18 to 25 who are supporting Trump. And I'm seeing a lot of females of all ages and all political persuasions supporting Harris. And I don't think the media is talking enough about the fact that this election may come down to male versus female, which is in some ways
Oh, I think,
is unsettling and disturbing. But this feels like, and I look at the data, men versus women. And I'm looking beneath the data, and we'll talk about it. You can ask me a bunch of questions, but this is fascinating to me. Um,
well, it is interesting. And I think, to be fair, I think the media has picked up on a lot of that. You see, uh, there have been a lot of stories about marriages, mixed marriages, marriages in which the man is voting Republican and the woman is voting Democrat, and also questions of um, people being disingenuous with their spouse about the person they're going to vote for. So, yeah, and that goes both ways. Um, I have seen campaigns, digital campaigns that are aimed at women. You don't have to tell your husband who you're voting for. Feel free to tell him you're voting one way and vote another. Nobody knows what goes on on your ballot. And I know that you have sort of anecdata um,
well, I've got
from,
anecdotal data and I've got some. So, one of the things we're following here, we're looking at closely, is influencers.
well, let me just
So,
finish. I just want to say
okay,
going the opposite way, where, there people sort of in that younger male demographic are not talking about, are either, evading the topic of politics with their significant other or their spouse, or outright not telling the truth.
100%. And I've asked people as I go through my daily travels those questions to see if it's true. What I'm seeing online in my data, I'll just casually ask people, and almost 100% of the time it's true. Um, so there's a lot to uncover here, and I think it portends an issue in our country that is deeper than this election. Um,
So
so get
let's talk about that for a minute. Well, first of all, I want to sort of wrap up the election predictions, because
okay.
I think it's really interesting. I think the Florida prediction that you're making is really interesting. I think Arizona is interesting. Are there any other sort of out on a limb predictions that you have? And if the answer is no, that's fine. But are there any other sort of surprising predictions that you are saying, "Hey, watch this," or "This may be surprising. This may come out of nowhere."
I don't think it'll come out of nowhere, but I think Georgia is going to flip back to Trump. I see that right now,
Hmm.
um, which is
Pen
different.
Pennsylvania,
Pennsylvania, I think Harris has it locked up. Um, her data in Pennsylvania is really strong right now.
Wisconsin,
Wisconsin is really tight. So if
right?
on election night, what I'm watching for, besides the uh, outliers that I'm calling and hoping that my data is right, Wisconsin's the one I'm really watching. That feels
Interesting.
really, really close. Um, but there's two other states to watch that I didn't expect. North Carolina and Texas. See, here's what I'm seeing. This is what's interesting in the data this time. There are states that were either purple but they were definitely, they when push came to shove, they were red. Um, North Carolina and Texas are getting close. I'll just say this, they're getting closer and closer. to being real purple. And I would keep an eye on North Carolina and Texas on election night. Um, and then to answer your question, Amber, so far I'm seeing something like this. Nationally, Harris will win the popular vote by 4 or 5 points. The swing states are going to be really close. And right now, it looks like Harris wins it by a couple states, but what do I know? I mean, what does
It's
anybody
going
know?
to
What
be
do the
big.
polls know? It's so close. Um, Here's what it comes down to: who shows up to vote? So, what I may do on Sunday and Monday is go out there and look for data that talks about enthusiasm, because it's
Yeah.
going to come down to those who early voted, who are so
I
excited
was going to
about.
say that, like, let's look at the early voting data as
Well,
well,
right
just
now
because
the
I'm
early
seeing,
voting, yeah, I just looked at it this morning. Early voting is up 1,000,000%.
right.
It's leaning 65-35 Democrat. Um, so that's important to note. And most of those females. Uh, I'll give you an
Women,
anecdotal.
women are busy. We got shit to do. We can't be like waiting around for election day to wait online and vote.
Well,
We're
what's
taking advantage
interesting.
of the early voting.
Yeah, so I did the early voting with you and my mother-in-law, your mom, and I thought early voting was the best thing ever. You go to town hall, there's nobody there. It's quiet. You walk in, all the same things you do in a regular election day. And at every table, there's one Republican and one Democrat running the computers and handing out everything. And
No, it was
one
very impressive in our
really
small
impressive.
town in Connecticut. It was very impressive to sort of see our legal, our the voting process in action.
And everybody was friendly, whether you were Republican or Democrat. It was like the old days. It was like, thanks for coming. Can I help you out? It was fantastic.
Those people are doing good work.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you to all the election workers around the country who volunteer, because I am sure there are moments on election day where people say mean things to them, and they should not. These people are doing yeoman's work by being there all day.
Absolutely.
Um,
Okay, now that we've talked about the predictions, I wanted, before we end, I want to talk about something else, which is what happens when this election is over? Do you
all right.
think,
Yeah.
because it's pretty clear that no matter, it's not going to be a landslide either one way or the other. So we as a country are still going to have sort of a lot to grapple with.
So I can see in the data, and I see in my conversations when I have an educated conversation based on data with people. So whoever wins, the next day or whenever it's ended in a few weeks, whenever they count every vote, you still have half the country upset, which on its face is not good. But then I look beneath another layer of data, and what I'm seeing is what I talked about earlier. There are a lot of angry men out there, um, and uh, and the women are angry for the topics we touched on before. But here's what concerns me the most is I can see now in the data and in some voting, it's going to show up in the election. Men 18 to 25 or 18 to 30, whatever you want to use, or maybe even older, 35, 40. Men who would normally vote Democrat are going to vote for Trump. They're angry. And I think so I'm a 60 plus male. I have spent 20 plus years coaching sports, almost 10 years teaching, 40 years mentoring. I can see angry men in classrooms. I can see angry men at the gym. I can see angry men everywhere I go. And I'm really concerned about especially the 18 to 30-year-old group. We need to do a better job mentoring them, listening to them. What are their concerns? Right now, I'm seeing a lot of anger toward, well, I wrote it down. I don't want to misstate, so I want to get this right. This is really important. Give me one. Oh, come on. You can't be kidding me. Well, I'm gonna have to wing it. I don't, since my computer flopped on me earlier. Sorry, guys, but I can roll with it. They're angry at that women are doing better, um, and they feel left behind.
I think I can say it, I mean, just because we've talked about it. I think that population feels disenfranchised.
That's a good word. That's a good way of saying it. You're a better communicator than I am. They feel disenfranchised on a lot of levels. They're trying to figure out what their role is now. You know, it used to be a little clear as what the man's role is, and it's not clear to them what's their role. Maybe they're struggling to find a job or to make as much money as their father or parents did. Um, they feel disenfranchised and left behind. And what I'm trying to share with them when I look at, after looking at the data and the stories is, yeah, we need to hear you and we need to listen to you. And it should never come at the expense of females continuing to do better. And unfortunately, it's coming out from many of them in an unhealthy way where they want to um, not vote for someone like Harris, maybe because she's a female. Um, and I've had conversations with guys who say, oh, there's no way I'll vote for a female. And it stuns me in 2024. But what I'm trying to get to is all of us adult men, we need to do a better job mentoring, listening, and helping young men become health. What does a healthy adult male look like? What does that look
Modeling
like?
it, yeah.
We have to model it, right? We have to model it better and pay attention to them. So I think I'll give you an example that I saw, and it's so hard to say this. This never comes at the expense of women ever, and their growth, because I think it's been fantastic. I have two daughters. I have you in my life. I've had powerful women around me my whole life, and I'm all in on that. But even the richest, youngest white male is feeling disenfranchised. And a lot of people might say, oh, come on, what's that all about? Well, it's because they're feeling disenfranchised. And we need to do a better job mentoring them that, where do you fit in the economy? Where do you fit in your family? Where do you fit as a couple, whether it's
I have
heterosexual?
so many thoughts.
There's
So many thoughts about
so
this.
many things that my point is we're not listening to them and we're not modeling for them and we're not mentoring them in a healthy way. And what we're getting is anger and rebellion. And long term, we started this conversation. What do I see in the data? Long term, we could be creating a generation or more of angry men, and that will not that will not go well for our country. And that is something we all need to pay attention to. That we can continue to do everything we should and are doing for empowering women's rights and their growth in our society. That should never stop. And at the same time, helping our young men become healthy adult men and where they fit in our society, in our families, and etc. We need to do a better job with that because I'm telling you, I see it in the data, I see it in the conversations online. They are really angry, and that's not healthy. That's just not a good thing. We need to do a better job. So after the election, that's one area, and I know you and I have talked about it. I'm actually thinking of starting a men's group, come up with some name and bring in male mentors who are coaches who coach sports, coaches in business, coaches in health and science, and listen to these young men so that they're not as angry and they learn how to become a healthier male and make healthy decisions, for themselves, politically, economically, within their families, spiritually, and not be so angry. Because right now they're just angry, and I see it in big numbers.
Well, I think so many things. I think anger most often comes from fear, and I think in this case the fear comes from losing a position of power that uh, that white straight males have had in this country for the entirety of its existence. And if you look at sort of, it's been said by people much smarter than I am that people in power, people who have all the power, never give it up willingly. They never
Ever,
hand it over
ever.
peacefully and happily. It has to be taken from them. And I think that that's what's going on. I think that that's what a lot of the straight white male culture feels right now, that power is being taken from them and they don't like it. And
I can see it in the data.
and as a woman, I have I think it's lovely that there are people like you who, and I think the answer is to listen to this disenfranchised group. I don't think the answer is to leave anyone behind, but um, a lot of these young men are walking around with shirts that say "fuck your feelings" on them.
Oh,
And
yeah, exactly.
so how do you get a group that's their motto, to talk about their feelings?
Well,
I think it's a challenge. I'm
it's
not.
a huge challenge,
I
but it's
think it's a challenge, and
healthy we need healthy adult males in their lives.
I think that's true. I think that's true. I think it's a time of change. It's a time of, the idea of what a successful, healthy adult male looks like is changing. It's different now than it used to be.
It's
And
different, and hopefully it's getting healthier. But here's what a lot of those the guys that you're speaking about, they see them as the new male as a snowflake.
it's weak.
Uh,
I know.
they consider that weak. The whole phraseology, and it's so what your point is correct. It's changing, and they're uncomfortable.
On the flip side, if the election goes one way, we'll have a lot, sort of a potentially this demographic of angry men, straight white
Yeah,
men. If the election goes another way, you're going to have a lot of angry women.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
and they have every right to be angry.
and so I think, sort of to your point, no matter which way the election goes, we have a lot of work to do.
Bingo. And I know you and I talked about this last week when I started looking at this data seriously. This election doesn't end on Wednesday or 3 weeks from Wednesday. Whoever
Well, the
wins,
election might, but
the,
the
the issues are so,
problems don't go
our
away.
country is going through so many changes, and I can see it in the conversations online. There's so much work to do for
Yeah.
all of us. Well, I know when we started this podcast,
Sort
you
of
said
like,
we live in
oh, sorry.
interesting times. This is beyond
Yeah.
interesting.
Well, I also feel like, when you get married and everybody's like, oh, don't think of the wedding as the end, it's the beginning. That's kind of how I feel about this election. This election isn't the end that's going to solve anything. It's the beginning of a lot of work that we have to do as a country.
And if it
Um,
doesn't get done, I'm concerned. One of the things I'll be following up and I'll be sharing on this podcast in the next few months is no matter who wins, what happens next in the streets? Are there things to be concerned about?
a topic for another day. We have exhausted our time for today. Thank you for listening, as always. And if you have ideas for topics or guests, or if you have questions about stuff that we've talked about in the past, feel free to send them along to digitaldilemmas@lenk.media, and we will address them in future podcasts. Thanks for listening.
All right, Digital Dilemma fans, that wraps up another episode. Thanks for tuning in and navigating our tech world with us.
Please rate us and leave a review. And if you enjoyed it, tune in next time. We'd also love it if you would send us any questions or suggest guests via email. Thanks so much for listening, and we will see you next week.
Digital Dilemmas is a Lenk Media original podcast.